I never thought I'd become the target of someone's psychotic vendetta over a snowplow. But here I was, staring at Susan Pemberton's perfectly contoured face twisted in rage, as she demanded I hand over my equipment for free. My name is Oliver Oakes, and I run a small landscaping business in Grand Rapids, Michigan. When winter rolls around, I make most of my income doing snow removal for local businesses and some of the wealthier residential areas. I bought my truck and plow setup 3 years ago after saving every penny from my landscaping work, and that machine is my livelihood. It's a Ford F-350 with a commercial-grade Boss V plow that cost me nearly $15,000, not counting the truck itself. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late January. I was finishing up a job at a shopping center on the east side when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Oliver Oakes?" The voice was clipped, officious, dripping with that particular brand of self-importance I'd learned to recognize over the years. Speaking. "This is Susan Pemberton, president of the Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association. I understand you live at 847 Maple Ridge Drive." I did live there. I'd bought my modest 3-bedroom house in that neighborhood 2 years ago because the price was reasonable, and the location was convenient for my business. The HOA had seemed innocuous enough during the buying process, just the standard rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. "That's right," I said, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "I'm calling because the HOA board has decided that all residents with commercial snow removal equipment are required to provide services to the community free of charge during winter weather events." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "Excuse me. It's quite simple, Mr. Oakes. You have equipment that could benefit the community. As a resident of Ridgemont Hills, you have certain obligations. Madam, with all due respect, my equipment is how I make my living. I can't just plow the entire neighborhood for free. The HOA covenants clearly state that residents must contribute to community welfare. I'll be sending you a formal notice with your assigned streets. We expect you to begin after the next snowfall, which according to the forecast will be Thursday night." Her tone suggested this conversation was over. Hold on. I never agreed to this. Where in the actual covenants does it say anything about providing free commercial services? Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B, Community Contribution Requirements. I suggest you review your paperwork, Mr. Oakes. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my truck, engine idling, watching the snow fall lazily across the parking lot. This had to be some kind of joke. I'd read through the HOA covenants when I bought the house, and while they were extensive and annoying, there was nothing about forced labor. I was sure of it. That evening, I dug out my copy of the HOA documents and went through them page by page. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B did exist. It read, "Homeowners are encouraged to contribute to community welfare through participation in HOA-organized volunteer events and initiatives." Encouraged, volunteer, not required, not forced. And certainly nothing about commandeering someone's business equipment. I decided to ignore Susan Pemberton and hope she'd forget about her absurd demand. That was my first mistake. Thursday night, the snow came as predicted. A good 8 inches fell before morning, and I was up at 3 a.m., ready to start my route. I had 12 commercial contracts to handle before business hours, which meant I'd be working straight through until at least noon. I was just hitching up my plow when I saw headlights coming down my street. At 3:15 in the morning, in a snowstorm, the vehicle pulled into my driveway, blocking me in. It was a white Lexus SUV, and Susan Pemberton stepped out wearing a puffy white coat and designer snow boots that had probably never seen actual snow before this moment. "Mr. Oakes, where do you think you're going?" she called out, marching toward me like she owned the place. "To work," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I have contracts to fulfill." "Absolutely not. The streets of Ridgemont Hills need to be cleared first." "Community obligations come before personal profit." I stared at her. She was serious. Completely, utterly serious. "Mrs. Pemberton, I have legal contracts with businesses that depend on me. I can't just blow them off. And you have a legal obligation to this HOA. If you leave this neighborhood without clearing your assigned streets, you'll be in violation of HOA regulations and subject to fines. Show me where it says that. Show me the exact language that requires this." She pulled out her phone and started reading. It was the same section I'd looked at, but she was interpreting encouraged as required, and claiming the HOA board had the authority to determine what constituted community welfare contributions. "That's not what it says, and you know it," I said. "Now please move your vehicle. I have work to do. If you leave, you'll be fined $500 per day until you comply. Fine me then. Send me the paperwork. My lawyer will love this." I didn't actually have a lawyer on retainer, but she didn't need to know that. Her expression turned icy. "You're making a very big mistake, Mr. Oakes. This community doesn't tolerate selfish behavior." She got back in her Lexus and moved it, but only after sitting there for another 5 minutes, making me late for my first job. I should have known it wouldn't end there. Over the next week, things escalated. First came the official HOA violation notice, claiming I'd failed to fulfill mandatory community service requirements. The fine was indeed $500 per day, retroactive to the day of the snowfall. According to their math, I now owed $3,500. I threw the notice in the trash and called a real estate attorney named Margaret Chen, who'd helped me with the house purchase. She laughed when I explained the situation. "They can't do that," she said. "The language is clearly voluntary. They'd get laughed out of court if they tried to enforce this." "So what do I do? Send them a formal response denying the fine and citing the actual covenant language? I can draft something for you." "It'll cost you $200, but it should make them back off." I agreed, and Margaret sent the letter 2 days later. I thought that would be the end of it. That was my second mistake. Susan Pemberton didn't like being told no. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving violation notices for everything imaginable. My grass was too long, apparently visible beneath the snow according to their inspection. My house numbers weren't reflective enough. My mailbox was 0.3 inches too far from the curb. My garage door had a small dent that violated aesthetic standards. My trash cans were visible from the street for 6 minutes longer than the allowed time on collection day. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I was accumulating hundreds of dollars in bogus penalties every week. I called Margaret again. "Can they really do this? Technically, some of these might be legitimate violations, even if they're petty. The problem is fighting each one costs more in legal fees than just paying the fines. That's what they're counting on. So I'm just supposed to let them harass me, document everything, take photos, keep records. If it escalates to actual legal action, we'll have a pattern of harassment to present. But for now, you might want to consider just being extra careful to follow every rule to the letter." I tried. I really did. I measured my mailbox placement 3 times. I set alarms to bring in my trash cans within the required window. I checked my house numbers and replaced them with reflective ones that could probably be seen from space. I even shoveled my sidewalk within 30 minutes of every snowfall, as required by the covenants. It didn't matter. Susan found new things to cite me for. The color of my snow shovel was non-compliant with aesthetic guidelines. The ice melt I used was the wrong type, allegedly damaging to the community environment. My truck with the plow attached was commercial equipment that couldn't be parked in my driveway overnight. That last one really got me. My truck was my vehicle. Where was I supposed to park it? The covenants clearly state no commercial vehicles in driveways, Susan said when I confronted her at the HOA's monthly meeting. You'll need to park it on the street or rent storage. It's a pickup truck. Half the neighborhood has pickup trucks in their driveways. Those aren't commercial vehicles with commercial equipment attached. So I should remove the plow every night and reattach it every morning. The plow attachment was hydraulic and took about 15 minutes to properly connect or disconnect. That's your choice, Mr. Oakes. Follow the rules or face the consequences. I looked around the room. There were about 30 other residents there, and most of them were pointedly avoiding eye contact. A few looked sympathetic but said nothing. The other board members, 2 men named Gary and Dennis, just nodded along with everything Susan said. This is harassment, I said clearly. You're targeting me because I won't provide free labor. We target all violations equally, Susan replied with a thin smile. If you feel you're receiving more attention, perhaps it's because you're committing more violations. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. February brought more snow and more problems. I was losing clients because I was constantly dealing with HOA nonsense. I'd be in the middle of a job and get a call or text about some new violation that required immediate attention. Susan had somehow gotten my cell number and wasn't shy about using it. Then things got weird. I came home one afternoon to find my plow had been spray-painted orange. Not the whole thing, just random stripes across the blade. I'd parked my truck on the street per Susan's demands, and someone had vandalized it in broad daylight. I called the police. The officer who responded was sympathetic, but explained there wasn't much they could do without witnesses or camera footage. My street didn't have many cameras and none of my neighbors had seen anything. Or if they had, they weren't talking. The paint was industrial grade. It took me 3 hours and $40 in supplies to clean it off, and even then, some orange residue remained in the crevices. 2 days later, someone slashed 2 of my truck tires. Again, no witnesses. Another police report, another $200 for new tires. I installed a dashcam that recorded when the vehicle was parked. The next incident was my mailbox getting knocked over. The dashcam caught a dark SUV slowing down near my mailbox around 2 a.m., but the license plate wasn't visible, and the vehicle make was hard to determine. I was starting to feel paranoid. Was Susan Pemberton really vandalizing my property? It seemed insane, but I couldn't rule it out. Then came the meeting that changed everything. It was mid-February, and I received a notice that there would be a special HOA meeting to discuss ongoing community issues. I almost didn't go, but Margaret advised me that absence would be worse than attendance. The meeting was held at Susan's house, a massive colonial at the top of Ridgemont Drive. The interior was exactly what I expected. White furniture, motivational signs about wine and friendship, and photos of Susan with various local politicians. About 20 residents showed up. Susan called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about community standards and obligations. We've noticed a disturbing trend of residents putting personal interests ahead of community welfare, she began, and I knew this was about me. Specifically, we have residents with resources that could benefit everyone, but they're choosing to profit from their neighbors' struggles instead. Just say my name, Susan, I called out from the back of the room. We all know who you're talking about. She looked at me with cold satisfaction. If the shoe fits, Mr. Oakes, you have a snowplow. This neighborhood has streets that need clearing. The city does a terrible job with residential areas, and many of our residents are elderly or disabled, yet you refuse to help. I refuse to work for free, I corrected. There's a difference. I have a business. I have contracts. I can't just abandon paying clients to plow private streets for no compensation. This is your community, one of the board members, Gary, chimed in. Don't you care about your neighbors? Of course I care. But caring doesn't pay my mortgage or my equipment loans. If the HOA wants to hire me, I charge fair rates. I'll even give a neighborhood discount. But I'm not working for free. Susan leaned forward. The HOA board has therefore voted to implement a special assessment. Each household will be charged $200 to create a snow removal fund. Mr. Oakes will be hired to plow all HOA streets after each snowfall. He'll be paid $50 per event. The room erupted. People were shouting questions, and I was calculating numbers in my head. There were about 60 houses in Ridgemont Hills. That meant the HOA would collect $12,000. They were offering me $50 per plowing event. Grand Rapids typically got 20 to 30 snowfalls per winter. Even at 30 events, that was $1,500 total. That's insulting, I said loudly. One plowing of this neighborhood would take me at least 6 hours of work, probably more. That's less than $10 an hour, and it doesn't account for fuel, equipment maintenance, or insurance. Not to mention you're collecting $12,000 and only planning to pay me a fraction of that. The rest goes to HOA operating expenses and reserves, Susan said smoothly. Take it or leave it, Mr. Oakes. If you refuse, you'll be fined for violation of the special assessment participation requirements. You can't force me to work for you at whatever rate you decide. Actually, the HOA covenants give the board broad authority to implement special assessments and community service requirements as we see fit. You agreed to those terms when you bought your house. I looked at Margaret, who I'd brought with me. She was furiously taking notes and shaking her head. This is illegal, I said. You can't force labor. This is America, not a feudal system. Then I suggest you hire a lawyer and sue us, Susan replied. Until then, the special assessment stands. All residents will receive their bills next week. I left the meeting furious. Margaret confirmed what I already knew. This was absolutely not legal, but fighting it would be expensive and time-consuming. The good news is they've now made this blatant enough that you could probably win a lawsuit, she said. The bad news is it'll cost you $10,000 minimum in legal fees, and it could take a year or more to resolve. What if I just move? You'd still owe any legitimate HOA fees and fines. And with all these violations on record, selling your house would be difficult. Most buyers won't touch a property with active HOA disputes. I was trapped. Susan Pemberton had engineered a situation where I either had to work for slave wages, pay thousands in legal fees to fight her, or take a huge loss selling my house. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Susan's smug expression, the way she'd engineered this whole scheme to punish me for not falling in line. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Then I had an idea. It was petty. It was possibly stupid. But it would feel really, really good. The next major snowfall was predicted for Thursday night into Friday morning. The forecast called for 10 to 12 inches, one of the bigger storms of the season. I prepared carefully. Thursday evening, I made sure my truck was fueled up and the plow was attached and ready. I parked on the street as required, right in front of my house. I set my alarm for 4 a.m. When the alarm went off, I looked outside. The snow had been falling heavily for hours. There was easily a foot on the ground, maybe more. Perfect. I started with my regular commercial contracts. I had them all cleared by 9 a.m., working fast and efficient. Then I headed back to Ridgemont Hills. The neighborhood streets were a mess. The city hadn't touched them, and nobody could get in or out easily. I saw several cars stuck, people trying to shovel their driveways only to face an impenetrable wall of snow at the street. I started plowing. I began at the bottom of the neighborhood and worked my way up, clearing the streets systematically. It was hard work, and the snow was heavy and wet, the worst kind for plowing. My truck strained against the weight, and I had to make multiple passes on some streets to clear them properly. People came out of their houses to watch and wave. A few gave me thumbs up. I just nodded and kept working. It took me 4 hours to clear all the streets, and by the time I was done, my back was killing me and my hands were frozen despite my gloves. Then I drove to Ridgemont Drive, where Susan Pemberton lived at the very top of the hill. Her driveway was long, maybe 100 feet, and it sloped upward to her house. The garage was at the front of the house with 2 doors side by side. Her white Lexus was parked outside, covered in snow. Apparently, she hadn't bothered to clear it yet. I'd plowed all the streets, so technically I'd fulfilled the obligation Susan was trying to force on me. But I hadn't done driveways. The special assessment was specifically for streets, according to the proposal she'd presented. I positioned my truck at the bottom of her driveway and started plowing up toward the garage. The snow was deep here because of the way the wind had drifted it. My plow pushed a massive wave of white powder up the driveway. When I reached the top, I had a pile of snow about 4 feet high in front of me. I carefully maneuvered my truck to angle the plow blade, then pushed the entire pile directly in front of her garage doors. But I didn't stop there. I backed up and made another pass up the driveway, pushing more snow. Then another. And another. By the time I was done, there was a wall of snow at least 6 feet high and 10 feet deep, completely blocking both garage doors. Her Lexus was buried on one side. Even her front door had a nice drift of snow pushed up against it, making it difficult to open. I'd plowed her in, completely and thoroughly. Then I cleared my own driveway and went inside for hot coffee. The phone calls started within an hour. First from Susan herself, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What the hell did you do to my house? Get back here right now and clear this." "I plowed the streets like you demanded," I said calmly. "The special assessment was for street plowing. Driveways are separate." "You deliberately buried my garage. This is vandalism." I was clearing snow from the streets. Where else was I supposed to put it? "Would you prefer I dumped it on someone else's property? I'm calling the police. I'm suing you. I'm fining you $10,000. Go ahead. I have dashcam footage showing I was just doing the job you forced me to do. I plowed the streets. I moved snow. If some of it ended up in your driveway, well, that's how snow removal works." She hung up on me. I was grinning for the first time in weeks. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up outside my house. I went out to meet the officer, a middle-aged guy named Patterson who I'd spoken with before about the vandalism incidents. "Got a call about a property dispute," he said wearily. "Mrs. Pemberton says you vandalized her property." "I plowed her street," I said. "The HOA has been trying to force me to plow the neighborhood for free. They even created a special assessment. I finally did what they wanted, and now she's mad about where the snow ended up." Patterson looked at me for a long moment. "Did you intentionally bury her garage, officer? Have you ever plowed snow before?" "Can't say I have. The snow has to go somewhere. When you plow uphill toward a garage, it naturally accumulates at the top. I did the same thing at every house with an uphill driveway. This wasn't entirely true, but it was plausible enough. Mrs. Pemberton seems to think you specifically targeted her. Mrs. Pemberton has been harassing me for 2 months because I wouldn't give her free labor. Check your records. I've filed multiple reports about vandalism to my vehicle. This whole thing is because she wants to control me and I won't let her. Patterson sighed. Look, I can't arrest you for plowing snow. If she wants to pursue this, she'll have to do it through civil court. But maybe don't plow her driveway anymore, yeah. Don't worry, I said. I won't be plowing anything in this neighborhood anymore. After Patterson left, I called Margaret and told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, then burst out laughing. Oliver, that was incredibly stupid and incredibly satisfying, wasn't it? Best decision I've made in months. Okay, well, now we need to get serious. She's going to come after you hard. We should file a counter-suit for harassment and abuse of HOA authority. Between your documentation and this forced labor scheme, we have a solid case. How much is this going to cost me? I can do it for a flat fee of $5,000 if we settle, more if it goes to trial. But honestly, I think we can pressure them into backing off completely. What they've been doing is egregious enough that they could face legal penalties. I agreed. I'd already spent months of stress and hundreds of dollars dealing with Susan's harassment. What was $5,000 more to end it permanently? Margaret filed the lawsuit on Monday. We sued Susan Pemberton personally, along with the HOA board, for harassment, abuse of authority, and attempted forced labor. We asked for damages, attorney's fees, and an injunction preventing them from enforcing any of the bogus fines or the special assessment. The lawsuit made the local news. Apparently, man sues HOA over forced snow plowing was a compelling headline. A reporter from the Grand Rapids Press called me for an interview, and I laid out the whole story. The article ran on Wednesday, and by Thursday, it had been picked up by several national outlets. Social media went crazy. People were sharing the story with comments like, HOA Karens strike again, and this is why I'll never buy in an HOA neighborhood. Someone made a meme of a snowplow with the caption, Freedom Machine, that got thousands of shares. Susan Pemberton became internet famous for all the wrong reasons. People identified her from the article and found her social media accounts. She had to make everything private after getting flooded with angry messages. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Margaret and I attended, along with about 40 other residents, which was the most attendance any HOA meeting had ever seen. Susan looked terrible. Her usual perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. This meeting is to address the recent lawsuit and media attention, she began, her voice tight. The board has been unfairly characterized in the press. No, you've been fairly characterized, called out a resident named Tom who lived 3 houses down from me. You've been harassing Oliver for months, and we all know it. Mr. Oakes refused to contribute to the community, Susan snapped. He's a business owner. You tried to force him to work for free. This was from an elderly woman named Patricia. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I've never seen such abuse of power. Other residents chimed in. It turned out a lot of people had been quietly upset about Susan's behavior, but hadn't wanted to speak up. Now that it was public, they were emboldened. Gary, one of the other board members, cleared his throat. Perhaps we acted hastily with the special assessment. The board would be willing to rescind it and waive all of Mr. Oakes's fines if he drops the lawsuit. Not good enough, Margaret said, standing up. Susan Pemberton has conducted a sustained campaign of harassment against my client. We have documentation of dozens of bogus violations, evidence of vandalism that we believe is connected to HOA leadership, and witness testimony about threats and intimidation. Dropping the fines is the bare minimum. We want a formal apology, removal of all violations from HOA records, and Susan's resignation from the board. The room went silent. Susan's face turned red. I will not resign. I've served this community for 6 years. You've abused your power for 6 years, I said, standing up. How many other residents have you bullied into compliance? How many people paid unfair fines just to avoid the hassle of fighting you? More people started sharing their own stories. Someone had been fined for having a basketball hoop in their driveway. Another had been cited because their child's swing set was allegedly too tall. A guy named Marcus said he'd been forced to repaint his house a slightly different shade of beige because Susan decided the original color was off-brand. The meeting devolved into chaos. Residents were angry, the board was defensive, and Susan just sat there looking stiff and furious. Finally, Dennis, the third board member, stood up. I moved to vote on Susan Pemberton's position as HOA president, all in favor of her immediate removal. Gary immediately raised his hand. So did dozens of residents, though technically only board members could vote on this. The message was clear. "This is ridiculous," Susan said. "You can't remove me without cause." "We have plenty of cause," Dennis replied. "You've exposed the HOA to legal liability, damaged our reputation, and alienated the residents. I'm voting yes." Gary: "Yes." Susan looked between them, betrayed. "After everything I've done for this community, you did it to this community, not for it," Patricia called out. "There's a difference." The vote was 2-1 to remove Susan as president. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The remaining board members turned to me. "Mr. Oakes, we apologize for how you've been treated. We'd like to resolve this without further legal action." What would it take? Margaret and I had discussed this. Complete removal of all fines and violations from HOA records. A formal written apology from the board. Reimbursement for my attorney's fees incurred so far, which is approximately $3,500. And a policy change explicitly stating that the HOA cannot compel residents to provide commercial services without fair compensation. "Done," Dennis said immediately. "We'll draft the documents this week." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was actually over, except it wasn't. Not quite. The following week I got a call from Officer Patterson. "Mr. Oakes, I need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about vandalism incidents in your neighborhood." My stomach dropped. Am I being charged with something? No, nothing like that. We've actually made an arrest and we need your statement. I drove to the Grand Rapids Police Department confused and anxious. Patterson met me and led me to a small interview room. "We arrested Susan Pemberton this morning," he said without preamble. I stared at him. "For what?" "Remember those vandalism incidents? Your spray-painted plow, slashed tires, damaged mailbox. We got a tip from a neighbor who'd seen something. We pulled security footage from a few houses on your street, and we found clear evidence that Mrs. Pemberton was responsible for at least 2 of the incidents. The spray paint and the mailbox. You're kidding." I wish I was. We confronted her with the evidence, and she confessed to all 3 incidents. Said she was trying to teach you a lesson about respecting community authority. He shook his head. "We've charged her with 3 counts of misdemeanor vandalism and 1 count of criminal mischief. She posted bail, but she'll be going to court." I gave my statement, documenting the incidents and the damages. Patterson said I could also pursue civil damages if I wanted, but honestly, I just wanted to be done with the whole thing. The news about Susan's arrest made an even bigger splash than the original story. HOA president arrested for vandalizing residents' property was picked up by national outlets. Late-night talk shows made jokes about HOA Karens. The story became shorthand for HOA overreach and abuse of power. Susan Pemberton's life imploded. She pleaded guilty to the vandalism charges and received probation, community service, and an order to pay restitution for the damages. But the real punishment was social. She became a pariah in Grand Rapids. People recognized her from the news coverage. She ended up selling her house and moving to another state, according to neighborhood gossip. The Ridgemont Hills HOA went through major reforms. Dennis became the new president and immediately implemented changes. The special assessment was officially rescinded. All of my bogus fines were removed from the records, and I received a check for $3,500 for my attorney's fees, plus another $800 for the vandalism damages. They also changed the covenants to explicitly limit the HOA's authority. No more vague language about community contributions that could be twisted into forced labor. No more giving the board unlimited power to levy fines without oversight. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it gets in Michigan winters. I continued my snow removal business and actually picked up a few new clients from the publicity. Some of the Ridgemont Hills residents hired me privately to do their driveways, paying my regular rates without complaint. Tom from 3 houses down became a good friend. We'd have beers and laugh about the whole situation. "I still can't believe you buried her garage," he'd say. "That was legendary." "I was just doing my job," I'd reply with a grin. The snow had to go somewhere. The following winter, I got a call from Dennis at the HOA. "Oliver, I know this might be a sensitive topic, but we'd like to officially hire you to do snow removal for the neighborhood streets. We've collected a voluntary fund from interested residents, and we can pay you $200 per plowing event. We estimate 15 to 20 events per winter. Is that something you'd consider?" $200 was low but not insulting for the amount of work involved. More importantly, it was voluntary, fairly negotiated, and respectful of my time and equipment. "I can do that," I said. "Draw up a contract." They did, and it was fair and professional. I plowed the Ridgemont Hills streets that winter and the next, with no drama and no complaints. Funny how things work when people treat each other with basic respect. I ran into Patricia at the grocery store one afternoon. She grabbed my arm and smiled. "You know, you did this whole neighborhood a favor. Susan ran roughshod over people for years, but nobody wanted to be the one to stand up to her. You showed us it was possible." "I just wanted to run my business in peace," I said. "Sometimes that's all it takes," she replied. One person willing to say no. Margaret and I stayed in touch. She said my case had become a useful reference for other HOA disputes. "You'd be surprised how many HOAs try this kind of thing," she told me. "Forced labor, excessive fines, harassment campaigns. Most people just cave because fighting back seems too hard. But you stood your ground and it paid off." It did pay off, though not in the way I expected. The publicity from the lawsuit brought me more business than I could handle. I had to hire 2 part-time employees to help with the landscaping and snow removal. My little one-man operation became a legitimate small business with a website, a logo, and a growing reputation. I also became a minor celebrity in Grand Rapids. People would recognize me and want to hear the story. I got invited to speak at a local business owners group about dealing with regulatory overreach. A law school asked me to talk to students about standing up for your rights as a property owner. It was surreal. I'd gone from being harassed and fined to being a local folk hero, all because I refused to let an HOA president bully me into free labor. The legal system worked, eventually. It was slow and expensive and frustrating, but it worked. Susan Pemberton faced real consequences for her abuse of power. The HOA was forced to reform. Justice, in its messy, imperfect way, prevailed. I never saw Susan Pemberton again after she moved away. Sometimes I wondered if she learned anything from the experience, if she ever reflected on how her need to control and punish had destroyed her own life. Probably not. People like that rarely change, but the rest of us learned something. The Ridgemont Hills residents learned that HOA boards aren't untouchable, that rules can be challenged, and that community doesn't mean blind obedience to self-appointed authorities. I learned that standing up for yourself is worth the cost, even when it's scary and expensive and uncertain. I learned that sometimes pettiness is justified, and that pushing a wall of snow in front of someone's garage can be a perfectly reasonable response to months of harassment. And I learned that stories matter. My story resonated with people because everyone's been bullied by some petty authority figure at some point. Everyone's wanted to fight back but felt powerless. Seeing someone actually do it, even in a small way, gave people hope that they could do it too. The following spring, the Ridgemont Hills HOA held elections for the board positions. For the first time in years, there were multiple candidates for each position. Residents who'd never been involved suddenly wanted to have a say in how the neighborhood was run. The new board was diverse, engaged, and committed to transparency. They asked me to serve on the board. I politely declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime, but I appreciated the offer and the gesture behind it. My house, which had been nearly unsellable during the height of the conflict, was now actually worth more than I'd paid for it. The neighborhood's reputation had improved after the reforms. People saw it as a community that had learned from its mistakes, rather than just another HOA horror story. I thought about selling and moving somewhere without an HOA, but I'd grown attached to the place. My business was established. I had friends in the neighborhood. And honestly, after everything I'd been through to defend my right to live there in peace, I wasn't about to let anyone drive me out. Summer came, and I was back to landscaping. I'd be mowing lawns and trimming hedges, regular peaceful work that didn't involve snowstorms or HOA Karens or police reports. My employees, 2 college kids named Jake and Martin, sometimes asked about the whole Susan Pemberton situation. They'd heard about it but wanted the details from me directly. I'd tell them the story while we worked, and they'd shake their heads in disbelief. "That's insane," Jake said. "She actually tried to make you work for free." "She tried," I said. "But trying and succeeding are different things." Tom invited me to a neighborhood barbecue that July. It was the first time the HOA had organized a social event that wasn't mandatory or tied to some agenda. Just neighbors getting together to eat burgers and hang out. I went, and it was actually pleasant. People were relaxed and friendly. Kids ran around playing tag. Someone set up a volleyball net. Dennis grilled chicken and talked about his plans to improve the neighborhood playground. There was no tension, no underlying power games, no sense that someone was watching and judging. It was just a nice summer evening with decent people. Patricia cornered me near the dessert table. "This is what community is supposed to be," she said, gesturing at the scene around us. "Not fines and rules and power trips, just people being neighborly." "Should have been this way all along," I said. "Should have, yes. But sometimes you have to tear things down before you can build them right." I thought about that a lot over the following months. Susan Pemberton's reign as HOA president had been toxic, but it had also been a catalyst. Her overreach had been so extreme that it forced people to wake up and demand better. If she'd been just slightly less tyrannical, people might have grumbled but ultimately accepted it. Instead, she'd pushed too far and the backlash changed everything. In a weird way, I was almost grateful to her. Not for the harassment or the vandalism or the months of stress, but for being such a clear example of what not to be. She'd shown the entire neighborhood the dangers of unchecked authority and petty vindictiveness. The court date for her criminal case was in September. I didn't have to attend, but I went anyway. I wanted to see how it ended. The courtroom was nearly empty. Just me, Susan, her lawyer, the prosecutor, and Judge Anderson, who looked bored with the whole proceeding. Susan had already pleaded guilty, so this was just the sentencing hearing. The prosecutor outlined the charges and the plea deal. Susan would receive 1 year of probation, 60 hours of community service, and pay full restitution for the damages. Judge Anderson looked at Susan. "Mrs. Pemberton, do you have anything to say before I accept this plea agreement?" Susan stood up. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. "Your Honor, I apologize for my actions. I let my emotions get the better of me, and I made poor choices. I've already paid a heavy price for my mistakes, and I hope to move forward and rebuild my life." There was no mention of me, no direct apology for what she'd put me through. Just a generic statement that could have been about anything. Judge Anderson accepted the plea deal and dismissed the case. Susan walked out without looking at me. I felt oddly empty. I'd expected some sense of closure or victory, but instead I just felt tired. The whole thing had been such a waste. Waste of time, money, energy, emotion. All because one person couldn't handle being told no. But as I drove home, I realized something. I'd won. Not just in court or with the HOA reforms, but in a deeper way. Susan Pemberton had tried to break me, to force me into submission, to punish me for refusing to obey. And she'd failed completely. I still had my house, my business, my dignity, and my freedom. She'd lost everything that mattered to her. Her position, her reputation, her home, her standing in the community. The person who tried to wield power over others had ended up powerless. There's a saying about digging 2 graves when you seek revenge. Susan had dug her own grave with her obsessive need to control and punish me. I just refused to climb into mine. The rest of that fall was peaceful. Business was good. The weather was nice. The HOA left me alone and I left them alone. Life was normal, boring, perfect. Winter came around again, and with it, the snow. I was ready, truck maintained and plow sharpened. The first big storm hit in early December, and I worked through the night clearing my commercial contracts, then headed to Ridgemont Hills to do the neighborhood streets. The streets plowed smoothly. Nobody harassed me. Nobody demanded anything. I did the work, submitted my invoice, and got paid promptly. It was almost anticlimactic after the previous winter's drama. As I finished plowing, I drove past where Susan's house had been. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler. They'd repainted the exterior a cheerful yellow and installed colorful outdoor lights. The house looked welcoming instead of imposing. The husband was outside building a snowman with his kid. He waved as I drove by and I waved back. Life moves on. Houses change hands. New people come and old tyrants leave. The neighborhood heals. I went home, parked my truck in my driveway without worrying about violation notices, and went inside to warm up. My house was comfortable and paid for. My business was thriving. My neighbors were friendly. The HOA was functional and fair. It had taken a year of stress and conflict and multiple thousands of dollars in legal fees to get here, but it was worth it. I'd stood my ground, fought back against injustice, and won. And I'd buried Susan Pemberton's garage under 6 feet of snow along the way, which honestly might have been the most satisfying part of the whole thing. Petty. Absolutely. Justified. I'd argue yes. Effective. Definitely. Sometimes standing up for yourself means going through the proper legal channels, documenting everything, and fighting in court. Sometimes it means hiring a good lawyer and letting the system work. And sometimes, just sometimes, it means using your snowplow in creative ways that make your point crystal clear. Looking back, I wouldn't change anything. Except maybe I would have installed that dashcam earlier, and I definitely would have gotten Margaret involved sooner. But the core of it, the decision to refuse Susan's demands and face the consequences, that was right. You can't let bullies win. You can't cave to unreasonable demands just to avoid conflict. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when you're not sure you'll win. Because the alternative is living under someone else's thumb, following arbitrary rules enforced by petty tyrants, surrendering your autonomy to anyone who claims authority over you. I'd rather plow snow for 16 hours in a blizzard than live like that. The Ridgemont Hills neighborhood thrived after the reforms. Property values went up. New families moved in. The HOA focused on actual community improvement instead of nitpicking violations. They organized events, maintained common areas, and generally did what HOAs are supposed to do. And every time it snowed, I was there with my truck and plow, clearing the streets for fair compensation and mutual respect. No drama, no threats, no Karens demanding free labor. Just a guy running his business, living in his house and enjoying the simple satisfaction of a job well done. That's really all I ever wanted. And in the end, despite everything, that's exactly what I got. Susan Pemberton tried to take it away, but she failed. The HOA tried to abuse its power, but the residents took it back. The system tried to wear me down, but I had good legal help and stubborn determination. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes standing up to bullies works out. Sometimes pushing back against injustice leads to real change. And sometimes, when a HOA Karen demands your snowplow for free, the best response is to use that plow to bury her garage under a mountain of snow and let the consequences sort themselves out. I sleep well at night. My conscience is clear. My driveway is clean. And my snowplow is ready for whatever winter throws at me next. Just don't try to take it from me for free. Trust me on that one.